In this video, we'll take a look at note mode, which allows you to play instruments, as well as step sequence and edit MIDI clips in a variety of ways. This mode consists of three main submodes. There's polysequence, capture, and monosequence. You could switch between those with the Add Effect button, the Add Track button, and a combination of the Add Effect and Add Track buttons respectively. In this particular video, we're going to focus on the step sequencing functionality. Both of the sequence submodes share some of the same functionality in common, so we'll take a look at that first. First of all, both of them operate upon note lanes. A note lane is a horizontal row of notes in a clip. By default, the third display line will show the name of the root note and scale that you're working in, as well as the name of the clip that you're working on. The fourth display line will show the functions assigned to the track select buttons, which are loop, that'll toggle the clip's loop on and off, and lock, which will lock the submode to the current clip. Next to that, you've got a display of which section of the clip that you're currently working on, as well as the range of notes that you're currently working with. Holding down the Scales button will momentarily switch to scale mode. Pressing it quickly will toggle into scale mode. In scale mode, you can adjust the root note and scale to work in. You can also move between octaves with the octave up and down buttons. Shift plus the octave up and down buttons will move by semitones. In the polysequence submode, you'll have an additional option named Capture. This will capture the notes from the current clip and convert them into a scale. Holding down the Accent button will momentarily switch to velocity mode. Pressing it quickly will toggle into velocity mode. In velocity mode, you can choose the velocity to use when entering steps. The buttons on the right select fixed velocities. If random is turned on, these buttons will set the maximum random velocity to use. Next to that, you've got two fixed random velocity ranges. And finally, you've got input, where the velocity of the step will equal the velocity that you hit the pad with. Both of these submodes can also work in conjunction with the note editing functionality of the encoders. When the Event Edit submode is selected, you can select steps for editing by pressing Select plus the step. Also, turning on a step will select that step for editing. When the Range Edit submode is selected, you could select ranges of steps to edit by holding down Select, then pressing the first and last buttons in the range. You can also select non-contiguous steps by holding down Shift and Select and pressing individual steps. Just like with Push's default functionality, the resolution buttons will select the resolution to use for sequencing. They'll also select the grid resolution of the clip. Pressing the Repeat button quickly will toggle into Edit Position mode. Holding it down will momentarily switch into Edit Position mode. In Edit Position mode, the upper half of the matrix selects the position of the clip to edit, while the lower half selects the position of the clip to loop. Both of these support multiple button presses to allow ranges to be selected. It's handy to have these independent of each other for several reasons. Most importantly, the position of the clip that you're editing has nothing to do with the portion of the clip that's looping. Secondly, when an edit position range is selected, the sequencer will switch between sequence pages as the sequence is playing back, and this can make editing difficult. We can easily rectify that by just selecting a particular edit position. The Stop button will stop the clip if it's playing or launch it if not. Delete plus the Select button will delete the clip. Quantize plus the Select button will quantize the clip. In the polysequence submodes, you can sequence 8 note lanes at a time. Each row in the matrix corresponds to one note lane, and alternating colors are used so that you can differentiate between note lanes. The Track State buttons display the position of the clip's playhead. When the Shift button is pressed, the first pad on each row can preview the note lane assigned to that row. I'll give you an example of how this submode works by sequencing a couple parts. As I mentioned before, the resolution buttons select the resolution to use for sequencing. They can also perform some other functions. When delete is pressed, they can delete individual note lanes. When quantize is pressed, they can quantize individual note lanes. When the mute button is pressed, the matrix will mute individual steps. The resolution buttons will mute entire note lanes. Shift plus the mute button will unmute all note lanes. When the solo button is pressed, the resolution buttons will solo entire note lanes. And again, Shift plus mute will unmute all note lanes. In the mono-sequence submode, you can sequence one note lane at a time. This works very similar to Push's default functionality. The upper half of the matrix is used for sequencing. The lower half is assigned to the notes in the current scale. You can use these pads for playing notes, and also holding down select and pressing a pad will select that pad for sequencing. When delete is pressed, the lower half of the matrix can be used for deleting or erasing steps. If the clip is not playing, the entire note lane will be deleted. If the clip is playing, the steps that the playhead is passing over will be erased. When the quantize button is pressed, you can quantize entire note lanes. When mute is pressed, the upper half can mute individual steps. The lower half can mute entire note lanes. Shift plus mute will unmute all note lanes. When solo is pressed, the lower half can solo note lanes. And again, Shift plus mute will unmute all note lanes.